Welcome everybody to the second annual UCLA Open Panel on Aging, titled The Aging Landscape, Emerging Trends and Changing Perspectives. For those of you who joined us last year, I'm happy to share that we have our panelists from last year with us again. And we are going to do things a little differently than last time. Last time we spent a little bit more of our time together reviewing the aging related programs and features and projects that UCLA is working on, which each panelist has expertise in their field on. But this time we're going to do a little bit of a shorter overview of the UCLA related aging programs and spend more time on discussion and Q&A. So as you have questions in your mind, feel free to type them in and we'll take a look at those as we go. So our agenda for today, we're going to spend no more than half an hour doing panelist introductions and an overview of our UCLA aging related programs. Then from 11 a.m. until 12 p.m. is going to be our discussion and conversation time. So we're going to spend that first 45 minutes reviewing questions from the audience. If we need to take a 5-minute break, we'll do it during this portion. And then the last 15 minutes will allow the panelists to give us their final thoughts and wrap up the session. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce your panelists to you today. So Aisha Dixon is the director of UCLA Emeriti Retiree Relations Center. She is also kind of my co-leader here in this panel today. So thank you, Aisha, for being here. Next up, we have Dr. Paul Su. He is faculty in epidemiology at the UCLA Fielding School of Public Health. He is also the faculty coordinator of the very interesting UCLA cluster program they do with their freshman students, and he works specifically with the aging cluster. We also have with us today Monica Moore, Community Health Manager of the Mary S. Easton Center for Alzheimer's Disease Research and Care at UCLA. I'm also happy to share that Monica is actually teaching a course for the OSHA program in 2023 as well. So we're happy to have that crossover. We also have today with us Deanne Morris. She is the Associate Director of Generation Exchange, a program that's in the Division of Geriatrics in the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA, which you'll learn more about shortly. And of course, my name is Anu Sheshayastapur. I am the director of our lifelong learning program at UCLA, which is funded by the Osher Foundation. And I'll also be moderating the Q&A, as I mentioned. So without further ado, I'm going to give you a brief intro to Ms. Aisha Dixon. Like I said, she works in the Emeriti, Retirees Relations Center, which serves the retired faculty and staff communities at UCLA through advocacy, education, personalized services, both pre and post-retirement. And under Aisha's leadership, she's worked very hard to create strategic partnerships between the university, Emeriti, and retirees. And their goal is, of course, to seek to enrich the quality of life in retirement at UCLA. The ERRC is an advocate and supporter of UCLA retirees since 1969. And Aisha is going to explain a little bit more to you about their strategies and their projects.
Thank you so much. Yes, so as mentioned, here at the ERRC, we are dedicated to dispelling ageism and promoting this age-friendly university. So Age-Friendly University is an initiative started in 2012 to kind of bring together the inclusion of older adults on university campuses to approach healthy and active aging through multi-generational efforts of people of different backgrounds, ages, abilities, and identities. So with the Age-Friendly University, we strive to be the connecting link for our retired faculty and staff to all of the campus initiatives. And we want to make sure that there are multi-generational efforts being done on campus with research and learning, which is why we're here today with the extension, because we want to have an open global network. And we're so glad that UCLA is a part of this AFU global network. You can go to the next slide.
Okay, so Aisha, anything else you want to add before I go over Paul's about the center?
We have a lot of great initiatives coming up. We do retirement workshops for our faculty and staff in the winter quarter. We do a lot of stuff with the chancellor's office. We recently had a recital at the chancellor's residence. We are working with EDI and the Healthy Campus Initiative to hopefully do more age inclusive activities. We're going to ramp up some things in the winter quarter. So there'll definitely be some opportunities if you're interested in partnering and volunteering and showing your support for our retirees. We are kind of, and I was going to drop a little hint down the line, but we're trying to plant the seeds to help be a part of the Olympics that are coming. So we're slowly but surely, hopefully going to try to make sure our retirees and our emeriti faculty are included in this global event that is going to be taking place in California. So it should be, hopefully I'm putting out good vibes to have our retirees included into some of the Olympics that are going to be held here on campus.
That's very exciting. Thank you, Aisha. You've done so much with this center since you've come on board. I'm really impressed and excited to see what else you bring to UCLA. All right, so we'll have more from Aisha, of course, in the discussion. I'm going to give an intro to Dr. Su now, so he can tell you more about the UCLA cluster program, Frontiers in Human Aging. And let me go ahead and pull up these notes here. And maybe I'll actually let Paul go ahead. I think it'd be best if you actually do this intro since you're more familiar.
Sure. Thank you for the introduction, Anisha. Good morning, everyone. The cluster, as mentioned here, is unique in several ways from the typical classes at UCLA. It is a year-long series of classes. It's not just, quarter by quarter. So, for example, our cluster is on human aging, and so it's 80A, 80B, and 80C. So the students get to stay with each other and with us. And so part of it, one of the goals of the cluster is to kind of form this learning community. And so they have the same TAs, they're able to stay with the same cohort year long. And you can see here that we've been able to measure some of the outcomes, and typically cluster students, and this is not just aging, but all cluster students are able to finish on time, and they have a slightly higher GPA when they do finish. And there are clusters on, as you can see, political violence, evolution, so on and so forth. Next slide, please. And what's great about it is we're able to kind of expose the students from different perspectives. So I'm coming at aging from public health epidemiology. We have another faculty member who does a lot of the bio, and he'll talk to them about what's happening at the cellular level. And then our third faculty is from social work. And so she's able to talk a little bit more about policy and, programs that, either support or sometimes hinder older adults. And one of the very first assignments, and we can definitely talk more about this later during the discussion, one of the very first assignments is to try to expose the students and get them to reflect on ageism. And it's really interesting what an 18-year-old thinks about when somebody is old, and then we kind of challenge him. How do we measure age? Because, is it really just, how many years the Earth has revolved around the sun? Because that's really, how we're currently measuring age, right? And is that accurate for everyone? A couple of the other assignments, film review, and we can chat more about that, but we have a list of films, and we ask them to link something that they've learned in class with something from the film. So ageism is something they often pick, but it might be something on the life course, it might be something else. And then we also have them do service learning, where before the pandemic, they would go out into the community and work with older adult organizations, but we pivoted, and we're now doing virtual one-on-ones intergenerationally also, and happy to chat more about any of those programs later. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'll just add that we at Osher are so happy that this program connected with our program several years ago, and we actually send some of our older students, anyone who's 65 and older can participate in these intergenerational exchanges with these freshman students. So we all, in all of our different areas here, love that intergenerational component. So thank you so much for partnering with us. All right, I'm going to invite our next panelist, Monica, to log on and give you a brief intro to Monica, and then I'm going to let her take over. Just let you know that she is, like I said, the community health manager at the Center for Alzheimer's Disease Research and Care. Their mission is to improve the quality of life for patients and caregivers, develop new medications and treatments, and to support research to better understand not just Alzheimer's disease, but also related conditions. So one of the things we love about that center and what Monica does is they provide free community education about memory loss, Alzheimer's, and other dementias and research. So Monica, I'll let you tell us more.
Great. Hello, everybody. Thank you again for being here and for this opportunity to be back. This was such a good event last year, so happy to be able to be here again. So yeah, at the Easton Center, our shorthand, because we do have a very long name of an organization, is that we really do try to, we have the world of the researchers who are doing the work, who are trying to, figure out Alzheimer's disease and other related dementias, and more of just a scientific aspect. But then we also have, our very strong world of clinical trials, where we're trying to get diverse people into these trials. We also have caregiver support groups, which is one of the things that I lead, that I'm very, I find is so important, to have this aspect of support for the people who are going through this and who are caring for somebody. Oh, you can go back to the other slide. It's perfectly fine. And then, so if we're thinking about, I'll just step back now that I've got the slide in front of me, regarding like clinical trials and the research that we do. So much of it really is trying to help raise awareness about Alzheimer's disease specifically, and other types of dementias, realizing that, this isn't a normal part of aging, that this is a disease. It's a neurodegenerative disease. It's, the most common form of a neurodegenerative disease. And seeing how it is such an issue here. I like with this panel is that we do talk about this, because this Alzheimer's disease is an issue of aging. That's your greatest risk factor. So if we're talking about how to live well, through the EERC and all these other great programs that UCLA has, it's also really important to be able to also reduce our dementia risk. And by being engaged as well, it does make a difference. When we think about the awareness of of Alzheimer's disease, thinking about this important thing of like how it does, and we've seen a lot in the past 2 years about health disparities, right? That's really been a big thing COVID really brought out. And we've seen this with Alzheimer's disease and other related dementias as well. African Americans are twice as likely to develop Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia than Caucasians, and Latino Americans are 1.5 times so more likely to develop it. So again, why, right? This is where we're at, trying to figure this out. And through lots of our research and support, this is where we are hoping to get the information out, to let the community know, and then to get people involved. The majority of clinical trials are done on white men, and that's not the whole population, right? We need medications that are going to work on everybody, which is why we really do have this strong aspect at the Easton Center of educating people about Alzheimer's, other dementias, and so we all can take like a proactive approach in our health. It's not just from the neck down. We also need to be more mindful of our health from the neck up. So I will head over to pass it over. I think it's Deanne is next after me. So, and again, it's so nice to be here. And I know we will talk if you have any questions, we'll toss those in during the discussion part. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, what you mentioned about, the neck up, the mind and the mental health and, the brain health. It's something that I think we all try to target and support in all our different ventures here, because we're starting to learn much more from the research how much of a factor that really is beyond just the physical health. So let's go to Deanne next, who is the Associate Director of Generation Exchange, which is a program that really is great for everyone. It's a partnership between LAUSD and, as I mentioned earlier, UCLA Department of Medicine that improves academic or seeks to improve academic and behavioral outcomes for children, particularly with supporting reading proficiency. And Gen X, what they do is they place older community volunteers directly into the classrooms with the students. Deanne also last year mentioned how they handled that virtually during COVID, of course, in virtual classrooms, and they focus on improving reading and math. So Deanne, please tell us a little bit more about Generation Exchange.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining. And I'm excited to be here again just to share kind of what we've been doing the last year. I think last year when I spoke, we were still in, we had to pivot from in-person to Zoom. This year, we are actually in the classroom as of October 1st, and we're excited. The volunteers are excited. The kids are excited to have them in person. They want to know where they've been. And I just want to comment real quick what Paul was talking about aging. Our little people ask questions like, you know, they tell the volunteers they have old hair, their hands are old. They tell them the other day, one of the kids told one of my male volunteers that you look like my grandpa and he's 100 years old and you still work. So it's out of the mouth of babes. We hear so many things every day, but you know, we recruit volunteers 50 years and over that are passionate about working with young people and just providing that wisdom, not only to the kids, they provide wisdom to the teachers. A lot of times we have new teachers in the classroom that have never taught before. So we're able to help them in just how to deal with kids, because, you know, kids will take advantage of you if you let them. But when it comes to the adult, our program is structured to provide social, physical, and cognitive skills to our adults. Our adults have improved around their walking, their physical activity, how they feel about life. Things have changed. And it's changed even when we collected data when they were on Zoom versus when they're in person. So we have seen a lot of change of what adults have done. But in recruiting this year, we did add a pilot program. We're in 6 schools in LA Unified School District Elementary School, but we are kinder to 3rd. This year, we added 4th and 5th grade as a pilot, and it seems to be going well. The teachers welcome it. The kids welcome, because they had some of these same volunteers when they were in kindergarten, 1st grade. We have been doing this program for 8 years. So we've seen a lot of change and a lot of improvement in what we do in working with our kids. In 2018, you know, one of our volunteers, the young man that's at the top on the left, married one of the volunteers in the program. But I always tell volunteers, we recruit them. That is not a guarantee. We don't guarantee romance or marriages, but it's just really exciting just to watch how we have come so far in the things that we've learned in doing the work that we do. But the main thing is that our reading proficiency with the classrooms, we see 70% of our volunteers, 70% decrease in office referrals. And that was one of the things that the principals had such a challenge with, of kids being referred. So that has decreased. The absenteeism and absenteeism rate and tardiness has truly improved. And the proficiency in reading has improved, reported by the teachers. So the teachers are saying that the kids are reading much sooner than they would have if they did not have assistance in the classrooms. And this year, because a lot of our students, because they went through the pandemic, when they got back in the classroom, they are still trying to adjust to being in the classrooms, socializing with other kids. being able to sit down, be still, pay attention, all those things when they were on Zoom, they didn't do. Nobody had them to do. Nobody made them do it, you know. So our kids, some of them, which is not good, that are like 2 years behind. So teachers are catching up from the 2 years that everybody was on Zoom to when they get back in the classroom. So our presence in the classroom has really been a help to the teachers because it allows them to be able to assign volunteers, students that are way under the grading, grade where they should be. Some of them kinders had never been in the classroom before, so they were at home on Zoom playing with their dogs, rolling around on the floor. And now that they have to come into a classroom and sit, be still, pay attention has been a challenge, but things are going well. We do see the improvement and we just can hope to continue to do the work. We did get funded this year for 4 additional schools. So we will be adding 4 schools starting in 1 in January, but 1 a year for the next 4 years. So we're excited about that. Haven't identified the school. We still have a list of everybody that wants us to come. We did last year start a program in Nebraska with the University of Nebraska there. They had approached us. So we did train them via Zoom and they're volunteers and they have started. I think they're getting ready to add a new school in 23. So they're in their first school now. So we're excited.
Thank you, Deanne. That's wonderful to hear how much it's growing. And Osher, as of winter 2023, in our brochure, we now list Generation Exchange as a volunteer opportunity as well, since they've agreed to let us, kind of make that official as an invitation to all of you. So this wonderful, all these connections that we've been able to make this past year. Thank you so much. And of course, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my program before we jump into some of the questions. Most of you are going to be familiar with this, but for those of you who are not, I'm just going to give you a brief review. It's a lifelong learning institute here at UCLA. So anyone who's 50 plus can join as long as they pay a membership fee, which is, we have a scholarship program if there's any issues affording that membership fee, but it's a low cost program in general. And we are funded in part by an endowment. So we're a self-supporting kind of volunteer supported program. And the idea is that it's a community style program where people can come and, enjoy a college level course that, we have courses in all disciplines. So you're basically getting a UCLA, college level course, but you're also getting a community for those who want to make friends. Even through Zoom, we've had lots of wonderful connections that have been made, students who met in class and then set up their own Zooms with each other afterwards. We haven't had any marriages, I think, like Deanne's had, but who knows, maybe we have and I'm not aware, but it's definitely a fun group of individuals. And we have around 1,000 to 1,500 depending on the year. So it's a nice community. Just to give you a sense of the program, we have several different features. We offer 1-day classes that anyone can take, including the public. And then the members have access to all the non-credit courses. We have lectures, speaker series, discussion groups, foreign languages, movement. We just added a Tai Chi class that is really hitting it off very popular with our students. Now we have a video library online. Special programs are a category for free things for members, non-academic events like tours, film screenings. Also, we have guest speakers and as well as our leadership opportunities, volunteer opportunities, such as with Generation Exchange and Paul's Aging Cluster. And then we do offer scholarships, as I mentioned, and now we're in person, remote, and we're doing a few hybrid classes each quarter where we have both students online watching and teachers in person teaching to a class live there as well. So our slogan is no tests, no grades, just learning for the sheer joy of learning. And as Monica mentioned, like all these things we can do to improve our brain health, really extend our lifespan, make our cells healthier, and lifelong learning and just being involved in some sort of intellectual atmosphere is research is based on that shows it really does make a difference in life expectancy and quality of life. So Aisha is going to help me close out these slides and talk about the multidimensional aspect of our aging landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you think about retirement and you think about older adults in the world now, and I was looking at stats online, you know, the average life expectancy is 72 years old. So when you think about that number and you think about people who are working to 65 or to 67 or to 70, that's a really short amount of time to enjoy that amount of retirement that people have in this bliss. So people are working longer to save up money, to be more participatory in the workforce. And this is for multiple reasons. A lot of times it's financial. People don't plan ahead to have that proper pension or retirement savings, or they postpone their retirement, especially during the pandemic. So many people and so many families were now living longer, living more communal, and also trying to maximize their finances. Their children, their grandchildren, they were all kind of having this multi-family unit. And a lot of it, you know, honestly comes from the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009. So people are just don't have the finances to retire. And even though the life expectancy is an average of 72, you know, generally across the world, that's higher than most places in the global developed world. So people are living longer, they're living healthier. There's also a talent shortage. When you think of people who do retire, they are taking that institutional knowledge with them. So the younger generation of millennials and Y and Z and Zennials, they're coming in, they're not having that institutional knowledge. And, you know, depending on the older adult, if their job description has changed because there's now automation or there's social media, it's a challenge for people to want to be able to stay in a field that they feel like they're being technology driven out of. And another part is also participating in society as engagement. A lot of times, especially during the pandemic, people lost that engagement in activities. They did not do as much physical activity, but it really is important to kind of have that well-balanced and well-rounded of activities so that you can kind of overcome the negative impacts of social isolation. And I saw someone in the chat mention Sages and Seekers, which I'll send a link to their website, but it's an intergenerational program that also helps to combat social isolation, because during the pandemic, we were not only physically distancing, but also a little bit emotional distancing. And another aspect is policy development. There's new policies being created all the time where there are expected outcomes of what a new policy is going to be, either for poverty or income insecurity or food insecurity. All these new policies have great intentions, but the actual practice sometimes is not as expected. There should be more long-term care supportive services, strategies to prevent elder abuse and financial abuse and neglect. The amount of scams that have gone on through the pandemic has increased. Lots of adults are really struggling with the economic security and food security. So if there's ways to have kind of a well-rounded policy developed and implemented, it could really support a more thorough aging landscape. And then also aging in place. So we all want to stay home as long as we can possibly to have our dignity and continue driving. I saw someone else posted in the chat, and have that independence. So with better integration and better coordination of healthcare services, many older adults can stay in their home and have some kind of in-home supportive services. And then also thinking of, you know, here we are in the 21st century, how do we redefine what aging is? And this could be lots of things. It could be culture, it could be how aging is perceived, especially in familial relations or stereotypical religious beliefs. So how can we as a society try to repurpose and redefine what aging is? As I mentioned before, there's lots of multi-generational households. So grandparents are becoming teachers because of Zoom and educational landscapes, or people having their second career. We have lots of retirees who discover they love sculpting, or they like art and painting or woodworking, because they never had time to do these activities and these careers, that they found a new love for all these different types of activities. So we are kind of trying to figure out how to redefine and break those barriers of stereotypical aging. So you're not having the commercials. I remember I said this before, there was commercials about anti-aging, anti-wrinkle. Why? Embrace it. I have my gray hair and I don't love it, but it's there. And you know, we have this whole society of, you know, something is wrong when we're getting older. It was anti this and anti that, when we really should be embracing and learning to love getting older and appreciating that we do have, you know, this second phase of our life. And I mentioned before in the last workshop, there was a quote that I loved, and someone emailed me as to the citation and the origins of the quote, because I thought it came from Dr. Torres Gill. So it's the first quote was not in 2017, but in 2005 from Ted Nelson. And it was, ageism is prejudiced against our future selves. So when you think about that statement and you think about how we're always trying to redefine what aging looks like, that's going to be us. That can be us in 5 years or 15. But the further we think about and the longer we think about aging, the more we can be receptive of it and realize that it's not always as scary as the commercials make it out to be. So I just wanted to touch on those few points, and we can go on to the next slide or take some questions for this one.
Thank you. That was such a great overview of everything, Aisha. Really appreciate that. We're just gonna, you know, this slide is kind of everything Aisha talked about, the happiness U-curve, where there's research that shows that you're actually happiest, you know, kind of after 50. And then, you know, I think I'll just kind of start the panel off with, you know, these thoughts. Aging brings increased knowledge and expertise. The experience of reaching old age can also be better or worse depending on culture. So with those two things in mind, how do we break these barriers, these cultural barriers that we have here? Let's focus on, you know, the United States. And I'm going to ask the panelists to all turn on their videos so we can really have a kind of a group conversation about this. And who would like to start us off with, you know, how do we begin to break these barriers culturally?
That's a deep question.
Yeah, Paul had his mic off first, and I think he's eager to share something. So go ahead, Paul.
Well, I was going to say either Deanne or I can jump right in. We're trying to get them when they're young, right? So you know, what's great about the younger generations now is they're so much more open. You know, I think they're being called Gen Z now, and they're so much more accepting of so many things, of same-sex marriage, LGBTQ populations. So it's really wonderful to see. But even, you know, with that openness, they still have some implicit biases, I think is the term now. And they're still, you know, we still ask them to reflect on their ageist attitudes, and they you know, oh, I'm not ageist, you know. But then when we push them a little bit more, you know, and yet it's there, and it's good because they're open to it and they're thinking about it. So I think that's one of the ways, is just education, right? Making them be more aware of some of the things. And I think Deanne mentioned earlier, you know, some of her students, you know, oh, you know, you have what, old person hair.
Right.
Well, what is that? I mean, is it just you know, graying? I mean, you know, so
Right.
so I think one of the ways, you know, is trying to catch or expose them earlier that this does exist, and then getting them to see that in the environment around them, whether it's, you know, in the media or institutionally, you know. And it's so subtle, the technology part of it. Oh, my grandpa, I'm always having to help him or her, my grandmother, with whatever. Well, it's just that they haven't been exposed to it as you have. You've been using this since you were probably born, and they've only experienced it very recently, so they can drive a stick shift and you can't, but we
Yeah.
can't, right?
I
So,
was just talking about how people can't read clocks anymore, but yeah, that intergenerational piece is
right.
so
So
important.
yeah, and they don't really think about it. I'm like, well, are we prejudiced against you because you can't read a clock or can't drive a stick shift? No, it's just different generations, right? So but getting them to see that, getting them to realize that is part of the fun.
So one thing I want to add to that, what Paul was saying when we talk about teaching our different generations about culture and learning culture, but seniors are just going to the doctor. Every time you get something, the first thing they say, oh, well, that has to do with age. I mean, they don't even want to do a screening or anything, because the first thing they're going to tell you, oh, that's because of age, or that's old age. So everything is not related to old age. You get a headache, that's old age. Your feet hurt. Well, when you get that age, you always have feet problems. So that's what our community tells us, is that just going to the doctor sometimes is just a turnoff, because everything that happens in their life is referred to age. And people get tired of hearing that, and it's not true, because a young person that's in their 20s, their feet can hurt, or they can have diabetes or whatever, or heart disease, or high blood pressure. But everybody relates everything to age. So people sometimes, they kind of go in their cocoons, and it's like they don't come out of their houses. They don't talk to anybody anymore, because they feel that every time they do, they're going to be subjected to that because you're old. And of course, nobody, the word old, like Paul, you say, it's like, we don't know what the better word is. They don't understand when you say, use all the different X's and the Gen X and the CX. They're like, what are you talking about? They're just trying to figure out how to use their iPhones and T-Mobile phones and all that. Some of them are coming out of flip phones. So it's a lot of knowledge and things. But I think in our communities, we just have to continue to educate our seniors on a daily basis. And one of the things that, as young people, by putting adults in class with young people, it's a win-win for everybody. The adults are getting things from the kids, because the kids set up their iPads and their cell phones and teach them how to text. But then also the adults teach them how to be young people, how to be respectful, how to listen, how to appreciate their teacher and share with other students. So we look at it, and that's why we've had so much success, because it's definitely a two-way intergenerational activity or program or something, because everybody's winning and that's what we have to keep doing, because our young people, they do teach us a lot.
I like what you said, Deanne.
Teach us to listen. I'm sorry, just the last thing, just to listen, because nobody listens to young people. They think they don't have anything to say. And even when you're talking to your middle schools and high school, because usually adults talk at kids versus listen to them, what they're saying.
And I think that sometimes the youngest and oldest in the generation all relate to each other more sometimes than with the middles. And you mentioned, the medical, scenario, which I think, Monica, would be a great time for you to chime in, since you work, in that medical experience, probably a lot of these older adults whose conditions maybe not be attributed just to age. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and the one thought too, I said, and then I'm going to get to what you asked, but the way that we can really address all of this is by modeling it ourselves. So, like you think like what Aisha was saying, like, I've got the gray hair, I'm getting used to it, but it's like, and being mindful of the things that we say. Like I have, 12-year-old and a 14-year-old, and there are so many times that I may want to say something about myself, like, oh my gosh, look at these bags, I'm getting old. But I'm not going to, because then I'm telling them that is proper behavior. So if we are more mindful about our words and our actions, then I think that is what people pick up on as well. But relating to the world of like dementia, it's so hard because of the fact that age is your greatest risk factor. But there's still, it's the awareness of it, but it's also saying that it's not normal. So, how many times have we heard, oh, I've had a senior moment, or, oh, I don't have Alzheimer's. I have my father-in-law says this one. He doesn't have Alzheimer's. He has part-timers. Whereas it's like, okay, so like and I'm just like, and I try to say, okay, I'd really rather you not say something like that, because again, how do we change this if we can't change it within our own families and our own homes? And realizing how people do think that if we get older, we're going to forget, and we are normalizing that. But that's not the case. Yesterday I had lunch with a friend of mine who's 72, and she just had surgery, and she said, well, I figured it's better if I do it now than when I get older. And just like her attitude was so great, was just like, I need to do this now because I still feel young. But I know some people who are in their 60s who are like, oh, well, I'm just so old. There's no point to even like get that surgery because I'm probably going to be dead anyways. So you see, it's the attitude, it's how you present it, and looking to that. Yes, as we age, our bodies are older, right? That's just a fact. Even a 5-year-old is older than a 4-year-old. But realizing that with that doesn't have to be the excuse as to why something's wrong. Like you said, like, well, if you have diabetes as a 20-year-old, well, if you have it as a 70-year-old, it's not age, it's all these other factors that fall into place. And I really think so much of it is that reframing our society and reframing the way that we think about things, and that we mirror that and we model that. So then the people who surround us will pick it up again. It's just that whole trickle down effect is really what I think is so important again. And also events like this, shoot, this is great. See, we're all doing it. It's we're again talking about aging, and we're normalizing it because it's something that every single person does.
So Monica, let me ask you, we had a question in Q&A, and I'm not sure if you have the answer, but since you are, over there in the medical world, what kind of things have you seen, or is there anything going on to help doctors, kind of get this sort of cultural sensitivity training or age sensitivity related training, or how to change that? Have you? Yeah.
Oh man, see, again, when we think about any sort of like sensitivity training, if we're talking about ethnicities, languages, relationships, the diverse world of patients who come into who we interact with, everyone just needs to slow down and be more understanding. And I think that people, doctors are so often just in a rush. It's like, all right, I've got you, you're next, and it's a greater world of education. Like years ago, I had a friend who went through medical school, and he said that geriatrics was like, it was an elective. Like he's like, that he didn't have to take a course on this. We're like, man, right? How is that an elective? That should be a required course at one point, because everyone, no matter what you do, you're going to interact with people as they get older. So it's a big, I think, problem in our medical system, is just the understanding of aging and how to treat people and how to talk to them as they age. But the hardest thing about aging, it's not sexy. So no one wants to talk about it. It is not sexy. It is not the thing that they're like, oh, hey, this is going to be great. It's often a forgotten population. But it's one that everybody interacts with. So I think there's lots of just greater medical institution shift that needs to occur for lots of that, because it doesn't happen.
So hopefully we'll see more policies and more practices changing about that. It is in the conversation. Paul and Alicia are unmuted, so if there's any other comments in that topic, let's hear them.
Oh, I was just going to add to what Monica was saying. I mean, one way, hopefully, is to see a provider who's been specifically trained in geriatrics, So Dr. Rubin, David Geriatrics at UCLA, is one of our guest speakers, and he always encourages the students, get training in those providers. There will be less of that. But I absolutely agree with Monica was saying, that should be a requirement for all physicians, not just the one who choose to go,
Right.
into geriatrics and gerontology. So that I was just going to say, if you can, hopefully find someone who has had training in that will hopefully at least minimize or lower the risk or lower the probability of seeing somebody who has some of those biases.
Absolutely. I think, as Monica said, and Paul, courses like this that help the discussion of longevity and switching that narrative to be more of a life course and think of things being more age positive. It doesn't have to be old this, aging that, but have the wording and then just our dialogue shifting to be more age positive in a life course and the aging landscape. These are really positive wording that we're using versus all the negative aspects that people have been talking about: crotchety, over the hill, grumpy. We have to kind of move from being impaired and diseased as people get older and think of more of, as I mentioned in the chat, those biases that kind of come out. And as long as we're aware of them, then we can kind of help shift our attitudes towards evolving the language and kind of figure out those languages that do kind of make it a little sexy, like a silver fox or, a silver vixen. Those are the new hot terms, and I would love to have those terms, applied when I'm a little bit older. But it's kind of like, we have to have realistic conversations and be open and honest about that. This is part of the life cycle. We all will die. We all will need to be comfortable having these open dialogues, because it really could give you a better sense of life to think about, age awareness and age positivity. And someone was talking about, intergenerational humor. Some things are just things that, different generations just don't get. And I've seen the show Old Enough, which is very funny and interesting and could never work in America, but it's very interesting how these shows come out and give you a perspective of getting older and what it looks like. I think I mentioned last time a show called The Chair. I think it's on Netflix, that describes what it's like being in higher education and feeling like your department is pushing you out the door because you're getting older. So it's just, our time evolves, our perspective of what old evolves. There's another comment about the president, and I remember seeing like a PBS clip on Meet the Press the other day of an interview that Ronald Reagan did, because he was so geriatric at 69 running for president. And, that's probably the median age of our Senate and our Congress. So when you think about how our life expectancy goes up and people have this sort of practice and employee engagement, where does that fit? Is there a number based on your career and how that looks for people? So there's no right answer to that question, and I'm not going to get political. So we will see. The people will speak as to how old is too old to run, the most powerful nation in the world.
I do want to address that question, since we had a couple people, and not in a political way, but thank you for bringing that up, Aisha, that we had some people ask, should Biden's age be a factor? What about people who make fun of President Biden? And one thing I just want to share is I feel like I have a very unique life experience working as the director of a Lifelong Learning Institute, but then socially being around a much younger population. And so, of course, I work with older adults every day. For me, there's no difference between you and me. But when I talk to people who are a bit younger, and it could be those students I work with who are in their 20s, probably similar to Paul's, freshman cluster age of students, there's almost sometimes, depending on the person, if they didn't grow up with grandparents or they don't have a lot of older adults around them now, there's this idea that there's nothing for them to offer or add. There's no value after a certain age because, because there may be some cognitive challenges or something like that, or physical or mobility challenges. And so it's very interesting for me to think about, when you are around an individual who may or may not have a cognitive or a physical challenge at an older age, but you realize that it doesn't really impact any kind of, intellectual, conversation you can have with them. It's just, adapting to, well, we're going to use a cushion when we sit in this chair instead of, being able to sit on this soft couch. I mean, there are such silly little things that for some reason, I feel like it's that exposure is if you're not around a population, and it's not just older adults, right? We think about this with any population. When you're not exposed to something, your perception of it is so skewed. So it's very interesting for me when I'm with other people who are constantly working with older adults, nobody has any sort of biases against it. But when you're around those who don't, they do. And so for me, Monica mentioned modeling, certain behaviors. I also find it very interesting when you hear somebody make a bias statement and then tell them, no, you're wrong. And it's just telling someone, no, that's wrong, makes them stop and think about it. And then the next time that might have come out of their mouth, it won't, and they'll think about what they're saying or thinking. And so just a little bit of my perspective, because when I think about President Biden, I see all these things that he's able to accomplish despite of his age. And sometimes I hear kind of an opposite perspective where, how can he, he's not productive. We need someone else. I'm like, well, no, look how productive he's been, and how some younger people may have even been less productive depending on who they are. So that's my 2 cents on the president's age. I'm not going to comment, like I said, on whether or not we think he should run for a second term. We never had a maximum presidential age, but who knows if that'll be something that comes up in the future. So I'm going to look at some of these other questions. I want to make sure we answer the audience questions. Go ahead.
No, I think, as you were saying, I think so often people get lumped into these generational cohorts, they're baby boomers or silent generation, and they expect everyone from that cohort to act the same. And that's we're not all the same person. I've seen, 50-year-olds, body lift, and I can't do that. And it really is not a one size fits all. People are just seen as people. Especially when it comes to institutional places, when everyone's in cubicles and there's different communities, there's different barriers that people have to overcome with working together. Like this person, they're Generation Z, they're going to be, so wanting to get promoted quickly. They don't want to be mentored. They want to get paid a lot more. Whereas Bob from accounting, no offense to anyone named Bob here, Bob from accounting might be from the baby boomer generation and just kind of, sit at a typewriter compared to someone else who needs an iPad. So it's just, you need to be seen as people and not just lumped together cohorts.
I love that. Everybody is an individual at the end of the day. We all know that. And Paul, we have a question I want to bring up for you now before we change topics, because someone asked when you were, you're the one who's working with these students who think, 50 is old and 40 is old and all that. Do you have any specific examples of strategies for how you address their biases when these things come up in class?
Sorry, couldn't find the unmute button. I think I had just typed an answer to one of the other guests also. But, so of course, the first step is getting the students to realize that they have these biases. But then some of the strategies, we basically it's education. So we teach them about heterogeneity among among the older population. So one of the first things we did in class was, what do you think of when you think of an older adult? And then we give them an age cut point, and and all the terms come up are the stereotypical terms, crotchety and grumpy and all these things. And then we said, now think of someone a loved one. And it's so interesting, those adjectives change, wise, generous, loving. And so it's like, so just because this is somebody versus somebody you don't know, right? So getting them to change that perspective. And then one of the other exercises that we have them do is, think and look among yourselves how different you are from each other, you know, all your interests, your likes, dislikes. And then they look at each other and we have them talk to, you know, the person next to them, and already they're so distinct. And then look, and you guys are only 18 years old now, add another 30 years on top of that, you know, how much more different and unique those individuals will be. And that's, you know, kind of mind blowing for them. And so, you know, older adults are so different from each other. They've had this amazing life experience, this life course. And so they're going to be even more unique than you guys are now from each other. So how can you lump them all together and say they're all X, Y, or Z, right? So some of that are exercises, strategies to get them to kind of just think outside the box, or I guess challenging them to think more about, you know, really, we really shouldn't be thinking of that population as this very homogeneous, they're all the same, you know, applying those stereotypes, because they don't really apply. They don't really apply.
I just want to add one comment, it's just personal, that I went through going from dyeing my hair many years to embracing my gray. But, you know, as a teenager, I had gray hair. So I got used to it as a teenager because they thought I was cool and I had dyed my hair with this white streak or whatever. So everybody started doing it in junior high school and high school. So it was cool. But many years down the line, when I decided to just embrace the gray, but going out, people would always say, "Oh my God, you have such a young face." And I had to get used to that because at first I would get really angry. And then I might be with somebody and they would say, "Oh, yeah, your face is young, but you have gray hair or white hair." And I said, "But I'm younger than this young lady standing right here with me," you know. But, you know, finally I had to embrace it, but it took a while to adjust to that. But that's the kind of things that people are subject to in the public. And this people I did not know. I could be at the grocery store, the mall, and people would stop me and say, "Oh my God, you have such beautiful hair. But you have such a young face." And I was younger, what we want to call younger. But just, and then people now, when they see me and I can embrace them and they say, "I wish I could do my hair like you, or stop dyeing my hair, or just let my hair come out." And I just say, you have to do it. It's just, and it's one day at a time, you know, because there are times that it's like, you know, you want to sock somebody because they said something, but, you know, now you get to the point that you just embrace it. And I tell people, you just have to learn to embrace it and take it a day at a time. So that is my story about just age. You know, when you talk about aging, you know, it wasn't about my face. It was the hair that people looked at first.
I think that's so interesting you bring that up, because there's like this sort of social media I've seen on Instagram, it's kind of like growing out your silver hair. I forget what it's called, but it's got a hashtag and a movement. And so people are embracing it, and it makes me think of the power of media. And I think some of the questions I'm seeing in the chat right now, I think the answer is how do we, what do we do about these, jokes that are offensive, like boomers, or what do we do to, educate people? And I think changing culture has so much to do with the media that we consume. And we talked about this a little bit last year. Aisha mentioned some of these shows, right, that are showing older adults in a different light. There was a time where if you saw someone over 65 on TV, they were, in a wheelchair in the corner, and that was all you saw. And so now we have that shift in how people are portrayed in the media. I also think social media and humor, someone asked about humor, is very interesting, because I'm starting to see, when I look at videos online, both generations, or various generations, laughing at the same jokes, or a grandma pulling a joke on her grandson. There's a lot more of these like intergenerational joking videos that are on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube and things like that right now. And I think, it's someone starts it and someone else starts it, and then people start to get on that bandwagon. But when you see these things that connect us, humor is one of the most significant things that connects us to each other as people. And I just wanted to share my dissertation that I got to do a few years ago at UCLA. I wasn't looking for this research outcome, but one of the ones that I identified was that the way people connected socially and created friendships was humor, a shared sense of humor. So when we can share a sense of humor, it doesn't matter your age, your gender, your race. It could be, language doesn't even matter. Someone falling down in a funny way and we laugh at it across the world. These things are really, humor is really such an important way for us to relate to one another. And it's that relatability really that causes the connection making. So media is helping with that. And so we can do a lot of these trainings and things at our offices, but that media, that, cultural component of the society, I want to be optimistic and say that I think it's getting better. And, if anyone else wants to chime in, go ahead. If not, we can, go on to another question.
Yeah, to think about what you're saying, having that humor and having that communication, it's for one of the questions in the chat about kind of like these doctors and their bedside manner. You want to be able to find a doctor that will be able to have that communication, that good client, doctor, patient communication. And if an older person is going to their physician, they want to make sure that they have a list written out for their questions and their concerns. Talk to the physician, try to make sure that they feel like they have active listening skills, that your doctor is empathetic to working with older adults, and when you go to a physician, if it's not a good fit, go to another one, because you want, as an older adult, to feel like you're being heard. They're not just over interrupting you or having all this medical jargon. It really needs to be a communication and something where your physician is not going to just ignore it and just have you for 5 minutes and then rush out to someone else. They need to be, and it really is hard to find a bedside manner. I know during the pandemic, my friends and I, we all started seeing different therapists, and it's an interview process. You go to one therapist and it's not a good fit, you can go to someone else. There are plenty of physicians out in the world where if it doesn't work out, you can find someone else that will be able to have effective communication techniques and be able to work with an older population. So, and someone else mentioned about the whole slip of the tongue. That's like the phenomenon of the tip of the tongue phenomenon. When you're thinking of something, you can't remember quite what it is. And I have it, and I'm not that old, but it's something that happens. We all have brain fog moments. We all can't remember that actor that was somewhere on that thing we saw 15 years ago. So there's nothing to be ashamed of. You should not be made to feel that you're ashamed of something that happens to everyone, children, adults, and all kinds of people, because things are just so rapidly moving with life that if you can't remember something, take your moment, try to make a connection somehow, but it's definitely not anything to be embarrassed or ashamed of, because I forgot where I was going with that sentence just now, but it happens.
And I should also, if I can chime in here on this, one thing I always tell people, especially in this world of dementia care, is needing people who really understand the role of the caregiver as well as the role of the patient, and how they are both important parts to proper care. And so so much of our world, we've been taught that we respect doctors for what they do, and we respect them and we don't question. But I always say, actually, as an advocate for even if it's your own personal health care, you need to question. And if the doctor does something that you don't appreciate in terms of ignoring the older adult in the room, or, then say, excuse me, but could you talk to him? I'll just be sitting back here listening, but he's your patient, I'm not. And because I think we all need to be called out sometimes, because we have our own biases and we just do things and we don't even think about it. So again, it's calling, and if it's your doctor, call out your doctor. And I know sometimes if we're looking at specialists, it's harder to just get a new one, because there are, but it's so true, Aisha. It's like, I wish that we could just say, oh, you don't like that neurologist? I'll get another neurologist. So, well, it's really hard, but it's okay to question that doctor. Before I worked at UCLA, I was still very hesitant to like question doctors as well. But now I work with a bunch and they're all just normal people who like pick up their kids and go on trips and forget their lunches. So like they do all that same stuff too. Like they're just because they're a doctor doesn't mean that they're above it. And I think they also need to be reminded of the personal care that we need. And that should be given to every patient, regardless of age. And, if there are two people in the room, talk to the patient. The caregiver who's there will just listen. But call them out. I think everyone needs to be called out on that kind of stuff. We need to be reminded.
I agree. And I think one of the biggest hurdles is digital literacy and digital access, especially during the pandemic. And now everything's on telehealth. So if you're an older adult and your doctor is not taking in-person clients as much, it really could be challenging to kind of have that support. So if you have, relatives or friends that can kind of help you with digital access or literacy, it's something that's only going to benefit you in the future. And don't be afraid to take courses to learn more about all the things you can with Zoom or GoToMeeting or things like that, because they really are evolving so rapidly. I learn something new on Zoom every single time I'm here because things just evolve and shift and they get better or sometimes worse, but it's nothing to be fearful of. We have to kind of just dive right in and be willing to hold on and go for the ride.
Great points, everyone. We are 20 minutes left in our session for today. So if anyone still has any burning questions that have not been part of the topics we've already spoken of, go ahead and make sure you put those in Q&A. I see someone has their hand raised, but we can't, in a webinar, we can't hear you. So please type your questions for us. One of the questions that came up right now, and there was another question similar, was, well, what do we do about people who do make fun of older adults on TV? SNL was, and Saturday Night Live was one example someone brought up, but there are sometimes these jokes made in the media, and how do we address that? Obviously, we are not in charge of those shows here and don't have any authority to change that, but I think some of the things we've discussed already, just about how to change the culture within our own smaller communities and how that has a ripple effect as well. And we'll see how things progress as our lifespans continue to get longer and longer. They're hopefully not going to get any shorter. So
if I could chime in just super quickly on that too.
Yes, please.
We have the power to watch those shows or not. We have the power to buy that ageist birthday card. We have so if you don't buy it, if you don't watch it, then that's right away. That's how you speak up for it. I put in the chat, I stopped buying those cards years ago. They're like, oh, over the hill. No, let's celebrate it because, it's a gift that you're able to still be here. Why are we making fun of people? And so again, as we said at the very beginning, if we're looking to really change the aging landscape, we do it with ourselves and our actions. So if you don't like the ageist comments, well, then don't watch them. If you get a feed through, on your Instagram or wherever social media, and you don't like it, you find it safe, then there's little buttons and you say I'm not interested in this topic. And we have the power. We may feel that there's a lot out there that oh, I have no control over it. But yes, I'm not a writer for SNL. If so, I wouldn't be here today. But, we do have that power to say how we feel about everything. And again, isn't that also why there's so much going around with the world of EDI right now? It's because people started to speak up. People started to say, hey, listen, I'm a woman and I want to be able to say my choices and have my viewpoints heard. So why can't we make this a shift where it is the people who are aging get there and, say, I don't like that joke. I don't want this, and start putting that pressure on our society that they have to step up a bit.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, because even I didn't, my mind didn't even put that together. So you're right. We as consumers, we have that power. Where we consume and what we do consume, it has power. That's such a powerful thing to mention. I'm going to ask a question, unless other panelists, have any other comments, I can go to the next question. So there's a really interesting question here about from an anonymous attendee that I think would be great for all of us to give like a 1-minute response to. If a documentarian asked you what aspect of aging you would focus on as subject matter, what would you select? So let's imagine we're all in this documentary, and we're going to go around, and I think maybe we'll start with Paul, if that's all right. What aspect of aging would you discuss in the documentary, and what would you say?
Well, I'm not going to use ageism because we talked about it a lot already, and I think that hopefully the documentarian would do a really good job of framing those issues. But I think what's interesting, and it's something that there's a lot of research going on even now, and it kind of goes back to the earlier questions about Joe Biden and his age, is that we rely so much on chronological age as a marker for how old someone is. And if you think about what that is on a calendar, I think I mentioned it earlier, it's just the number of times our Earth has revolved around the sun. That's all we're using. It's very arbitrary. In other cultures, they use the moon, right, as their calendar. So we'd all be very different ages if we happen to be in one of those cultures. So what's really neat is there's all this research now on what is a good way to evaluate someone's age. Right, so they've been looking at biological markers. There's psychological aging. So basically, competency. Right, there are 70, 80-year-olds who are super, doing amazing research still. So what is a good way? I think that's a really interesting topic. What's a good way to evaluate someone's age? Right, rather than just using chronology, rather than just using calendar time, right? Is there a way to measure someone's competence, someone's, facility, whether the creativeness, right, rather than just relying on age? And what's so interesting about that, even within an individual, different organs age differently. Somebody who's been a swimmer or a runner all their lives will have amazing lung capacity. Right, somebody who's a musician, have amazing, year. So, how do you measure aging? In addition to just using calendar time.
So my answer was going to be psychological, mental, kind of how people are, their mental abilities, and if they can absorb, process, and also retain information is something that I think is one of the important things I would like to see in a documentary, because the brain kind of controls the whole body. So being able to focus and see how the brain ages and kind of how psychologically and our mental well-being, I think should be a huge focus on this imaginary documentary that if someone's working on, I want to get in on that documentary. That sounds like an amazing film though.
So I want to just add, just recruiting, when we recruit for our volunteers, we say 50 and over. And we use that number only because we're looking for people that are retired, not working, looking for something else to do. They have a passion for young people. And when you talk about, so how we pick and identify our volunteers, we do a cognitive kind of assessment. Now, we used to call it a test, and the volunteers got so nervous about the word test. So, I haven't taken a test since I was in high school. I'm not a good test taker. So people got so nervous about the word test. So then we said we changed it to so people wouldn't be so fearful about, I'm too old to take a test. I mean, these are things that we would hear. So we call it an assessment. And the assessment is just really to look at, can they follow instructions? Can they read a word? Can they not even spell, but even write a sentence that makes sense? And the spelling might not be right, but can you write a complete sentence? So those are things that we have to look at as an older, as an adult, a mature adult, making sure, because if they go into a classroom and a teacher is telling them something to do, the teacher doesn't have time to tell them 10 times to repeat it, but also working with little people. And then what they learn once they get in the classroom, things that they don't know, like especially when it comes to math, because that whole new math is totally different than what it used to be, I call back in the day. So our volunteers, even though we teach them the new math, some still struggle, but you have young people, so that one kid will say, okay, Miss Jones, I'm going to teach you math if you teach me reading, because they're good at math and they know how to count those blocks versus 2 times 2 is 4. They don't do that anymore. So we really had to, we really embrace how we, work with our volunteers, making sure they feel comfortable, because everybody's not the norm in the standards. So in a documentary, it would have to show how there's different ways to learn, to hear, to speak, and how, and being a good messenger, because that's what's so important. I don't care how you put something in writing, but how it's received by the person that's going to get it and how I deliver that message. I think it's important.
So I'm going to chime in on this one, and I'm just going to say that, if we're looking at an area of aging that I do believe that still really needs to be explored a lot, I'm sticking with my field. I'm sticking with the Alzheimer's dementia route, because, especially if we're talking about it in the world of a social landscape, of how it is affecting people as we, on so many different levels. It's not just one person is forgetting things. It's like, okay, then that person, there's the caregiver aspect. There's all of these other things that we don't see. It's the stuff that happens in the homes, that the world of the number of people who live in the community who have illnesses as that either due to aging or just that and we don't know about, and realizing that, hey, that's your neighbor. So how do we help them more, again, in this, the social context? I'm going to leave the research to the super smart people, they can do this. Let's talk about the people, not so much the cells and the neurons, and seeing how can we turn a camera into the world of who are our neighbors, and these people, what are they doing every single day in the world of Alzheimer's and dementia, and caring for somebody. Because I think if we understood, we'd all have a little bit more compassion as well. Because, when soon as you think, dementia, everyone just thinks memory loss, but it's so much greater than that. And with that understanding, I think then would allow people to be a little bit more, again, welcoming, accepting aging, and seeing what people go through, and seeing the compassion that we need to give to everyone. Because if we did that, shoot, the world would be a much better place if we all just had a little bit more compassion. So if we're getting filming a documentary here, let's try to do one that's going to help across the board, that we, sort of open those doors. Okay, what's going on next door? What is the life like? So that we can be, better advocates for ourselves, for our neighbors, and I think really the trickle down effect would be great.
So I guess I'm the last one in the documentary. I feel like my brain is always a little bit weird, so I'm going to go a bit of a different direction, because my research areas is a lot of social, psychological kind of stuff. But where my brain is going, because we've talked about so many of the other aspects of aging, I keep thinking about how I'm a child of a boomer. My mother was 40 when I was born. That's becoming far more normal now than it used to be, right? But I think of how much wisdom she had at 40, and how she always told me, I wish my mom who was 20 maybe when my mother was born, back when women just had, 9, 10 children in certain cultures, and it was a very different kind of lifestyle. But, having the opportunity to be older and have a child, and how much wisdom you could pass down to that child, and how much I feel like that's helped me stay on a successful path in life, right? Where you always want to kind of wander the wrong way when you're a child. So that wisdom, and how we recognize and value that wisdom in all of our older adults, because there is something about life experience that it doesn't matter, you know, where you live. If you're older, you have more life experience, right? Of course, there are those of us who have more diverse experiences than others and have therefore maybe perhaps more wisdom or whatever you want to call it. But that that is so important, I think, of passing that on. And when you are understanding the wisdom of someone older than you, you also understand that they have certain skills and, you know, things that you may not ever have. So when this new generation kind of talks about all their technology and how they're so much better at it than the, you know, and how are these older people, if, you know, we're pushing them out because they don't know their technology, but they have certain skills that this younger generation doesn't have at all. And the only way to maintain that kind of skill set is to pass it down and to learn from those people, even if you're not actively using it, right? So I think that understanding how, I would love to explore more like the older that we're getting, that we're having these children, and like how that's affecting wisdom being passed down. That's kind of where my brain's at, somehow putting that in the documentary. I just think it's going to be very fascinating to see like the next 100 years and how the children turn out as all these different things are happening, because we are really, I think the baby boomer generation, in my opinion, has seen the most change the most rapidly probably ever in history. So there's really a very interesting time right now to look at aging and how we're gonna, you know, keep our wisdom passed down from generation to generation. So with that, I'm gonna allow each panelist, if they have any final thoughts to share. We did kind of share our final thoughts through this question, but if there's anything else anybody wants to add, please do so. And if not, I'm gonna suggest that we all put our contact information or the information for our programs into the chat, because a lot of people have been asking, how can I get, you know, how can I sign up for Generation Exchange or learn more about the Alzheimer's Research Center and the Emeriti Center and things like that. So if I could ask each panelist to put their information, websites, you know, whatever you have with the chat feature. And then as we do that, if anyone has any final thoughts they want to share, please feel free to do so.
You mean you're expecting us to multitask here? Come on. We can't type and share at the same time.
Minutes,
all right?
You know, 5 minutes is not a lot of time to ask a whole new question. So if you have any, let me look at the Q&A and see if there's anything else. Thank you for those of you sending your thanks.
I kind of answered a couple of the ones in the chat about the filler sentence and SNL. But you know, when it comes to our department, we are growing in population because every year faculty and staff retire. So we're at about 18,000 retired faculty and staff. And you know, my goal is to move forward our department to the next century. And, you know, we just celebrated our 53rd year of being on campus as a support system to advocate for our retirees. And one of the biggest things, as I mentioned in the beginning, is trying to have some kind of inclusivity with the Olympics and the Paralympics. These are things that bring together the global unity of people from all ages and abilities, some at the peak of their, well, they're all at the peak of their physical being. And I think it's going to be great if I can kind of, I don't want to say weasel my way in, but if I can kind of position our department to be a supportive tie-in to our retirees, because they know the campus the best. They know the back ins and outs of directions. It's something that we've done for the pre-pandemic stages of helping out with move-in day, helping out with graduation. Our retirees are the ones who, you know, we're helping engineer that building. So they know when a parent is looking for so-and-so building, how they can point people in directions. So I'm hopeful, I'm manifesting it into the universe to position our department as a supportive attribute, as volunteering or something to help support the Olympic Games in 2026. I gotta really start working on, you know, my letter, my template to get us involved in that. So I put my website in the chat. So that's kind of my little last spiel.
And that's so incredible, Aisha. I can't believe you're, able to, I'm so impressed that you're able to go and get us in the Olympics, hopefully. I mean, Aisha, for those of you who don't know, I've said it once before, she's done so many wonderful things for UCLA's aging initiative of everybody on the panel has, but it's been a pleasure, absolute pleasure to work with you since you came to UCLA a few years ago. So thank you for everything you're doing to support our older adults.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna just jump in on my last little plug that I always like to give, and just little is at the Easton Center, one of our big areas of research really is looking for diverse populations to help with our clinical trials, needing people who are healthy, need people who are aging, some are observational, some are interventional, and realize that we do need this. We need people, and everyone who is here today, you're all connected with UCLA somehow. So, if you have any interest in trying to help with the research of Alzheimer's disease and other related dementias, please reach out to us. I put our information in the email or in the chat, our website, as well as my email, because without that, we're not going to move forward. And we say the first person who's going to be cured of Alzheimer's is going to be somebody in a clinical trial. And, so we really need that, but we need a diverse group. And so that's always my big plug. So there's my plug. But also, if you are a caregiver of somebody who does have dementia of some sort, reach out to me. I would love to be able to help you with resources so that you get the help as well that you very much need.
Thank you so much, Monica. I'm also for each speaker, I'm going to share a little kudos to them. Monica, the work she does is incredible as well. And we're so excited that she's agreed to teach a course called Beyond Alzheimer's, the Other Types of Dementia on January 20th for the OSHA program. I'm going to put, we've been trying to get her for quite some time, so it's very exciting. So I'm going to put that link in the chat right now for anybody who would like to take a look at that course. You can take a look at that there. So important that we have you in our community, Monica. Thank you so much. And Paul and Deanne, who are working hard on that intergenerational component that is so crucial, as we all know. Please give us your final thoughts. Thank you.
I just want to say that we are looking for volunteers every day. And even if you've never worked with children before, we still welcome you. We do a 1-week intense training, 5 days, all day, like 7 hours, just to make sure you're prepared. We don't send you in there without the tool and toolkit that you need to be able to work with the kids. So again, we're looking for anyone that has the interest, or even if it's not you, you might know someone that has the interest in working with young people. And I have my phone number and the website's there, and there's a couple of videos, I think, on the website that you can look at to kind of get a better understanding of what we do and how people feel and why they do the work that they do, because it's definitely a passion about helping others.
And thank you, Deanne, Deanne has worked so much with me to get her organization and ours connected. And like I said, it's in our brochure now. So thank you so much.
We appreciate you too. Thank you.
And last but not least, Paul, who has the task of, these 18-year-olds who are such a challenging group sometimes. Thank you for your work, and tell us what your final thoughts are.
Sometimes, Deanne, they do act like kids too. I hate to say it. But actually, I just wanted to thank everyone on the panel and kind of echo what's been here. There are so many opportunities at UCLA to get involved, whether it's with Anusha through OSHA, Monica with clinical trials, Aisha through alumni, or one of our programs, service learning. I encourage, all of you, all of the guests, please, contact any one of us. I think we'd love to have you be part of this ongoing intergenerational conversation. The students, I know our students definitely have a lot to learn from, the older generation. So I think I just want to conclude by just saying, please join us.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, so happy to have you all here. I love working at UCLA for reasons like this and what we're all doing. If anybody has any additional questions, I put my email in the chat. I can always get it to the panelists, or you just email OSHA. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us today. Education is our strongest tool for change. So hopefully we can all gather again next year and continue this conversation. Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.
Happy holidays.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.